Everybody in?
Looks like it, yes.
Okay, all right, well, we will call the February 4th Multimodal Transportation Board to order at 6:02. Again, this is all a virtual Zoom meeting, so if I can remind everybody to control your mute if you're not speaking, and raise your hand to help facilitating any dialogue in an orderly manner. With that, can we go for the roll call, please?
Johanna Slinga.
Here.
David Hawker.
Here.
David Lurie.
Here in Naples, Florida.
Oh yeah, thank you.
Right.
Johanna, where are you located?
Bloomfield Hills, Michigan.
Bloomfield Hills. And David Hawker, where are you located right now?
Birmingham, Michigan.
Okay. And then perfect. Andrew Haig.
Yeah, Birmingham, Michigan.
Tom Peard.
Here, Birmingham, Michigan.
Katie Schaefer.
Here, Birmingham, Michigan.
Doug White. Joe Zane. Okay.
All right. We need to, I'm going to have to switch back and forth, so my apologies here between the two screens, but if we could review the agenda, you've been sent it. If we could approve the minutes from December the 3rd, unless there's any changes. You need a motion to approve the minutes from.
One item. Item 6. It gives in reply to Mr. Haig, but it doesn't say what the question was that was being replied to.
Which page is this?
Page 2, item 6, meeting open to the public for items not on the agenda. In reply to Mr. Haig, PD Ecker noted that blah, 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 but it didn't actually state what the question was that was in reply to.
Okay.
The next one is what the question was. The first one doesn't. That was all. That's the only thing that looks different to me.
Okay, Laura, do you think you could go back and add in the question? And would you be willing to administrate or to amend or approve the minutes with that amendment that we add that in?
Well, I can absolutely go back and add in the question. It's a pretty standard thing that I do in the minutes to keep them a bit more succinct, that I provide just the answer, but if you'd like the question added in, I can absolutely do that.
I can abbreviate it. It's just it's a standalone, whereas the next paragraph said, in regards to Mr. Haig's questions about the Regional Transit Authority. So it just shows a disconnect and discontinuity in the methodology. That's all. Just summarizing the one sentence, and that's all I would ask for.
Sure, no problem.
Other than that, I have no problem with approving them as they stand.
Is that a motion?
We can make it a motion. Yeah, I'd like to make a motion to approve the meeting minutes of the previous multimodal board meeting, with the exception of one modification to be added to item 6.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second.
Can we go through the roll call for the all in favor, please?
Yes. Who would you like to have the second?
I didn't catch who actually said that.
I think David Lurie was first.
Okay. So Andrew Haig.
Yes.
David Lurie.
Yes.
David Hawker.
Yes.
Tom Peard.
Yes.
Katie Schaefer.
Yes.
Johanna Slinga.
Yes.
Okay, all set.
All right. With that, we can jump into the first topic.
Okay. The first topic will be a presentation by Ben Stupka from the Regional Transit Administration and Robert Kramer from SMART. And gentlemen, I'm just going to bring you in with your videos and unmute you. So just give me a second here. And I assume, do you want me, one or both of you, to have co-host rights to share screen? Okay. I'm working on it. One sec.
Okay. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Cool. All right.
Okay, Ben, you should be a co-host now, so you should be able to share your.
Okay.
First of all, thank you very much to both of you for joining us tonight. Just as a little intro, we did I shared the mobility-oriented development study, this one that you're showing the title page on, with the multimodal board at their December meeting, and they had some questions about it. And so it seemed like this would be a great topic to have you come and talk about what it is, your regional goals and how Birmingham fits into that. And of course, we have several new members on the board as well who may or may not be as familiar with some of the multimodal efforts going on in the region. So it seemed like a great time to have you come and present. So thank you very much for joining us.
Sure, thank you. So
Real quick, Ben, before you get started.
yeah, I was going to say, let Robert go. Go ahead, Robert. Yeah.
I'm the deputy GM at Smart, for those of you who I have not met before. And I just wanted to start off by saying that this is something that Ben and the RTA have really, this is their project. They've done a lot of really good work on this. And it kind of has managed to span a couple of different important objectives, and Ben will tell you all about them. So I just wanted to give my full endorsement to Ben and his efforts. And I'm just here for along for the ride and to help answer any questions that might come up about how Smart kind of fits into the big picture. So thanks for letting me start off, Ben.
Thanks, Robert. Thanks, Jana. Thank you, members of the board, for having me present. Hopefully it's I've been in front of the board before. Hopefully, at some point I'll be in front of the board in person, sometime soon. Realizing that I probably should have put a few slides in on broad RTA context, I will try my best to kind of give a verbal overview and get into the study. So the RTA, the Regional Transit Authority of Southeast Michigan, was established in 2012 through state legislation. The role of the RTA is to coordinate transit planning and with the transit providers, so that in your area is SMART, but it also includes DDOT in the city of Detroit, the RIDE in Ann Arbor, the Q Line in the city of Detroit, and the People Mover in the city of Detroit. We coordinate with all of those transit providers, develop a regional plan, do regional strategic studies on issues that may be of kind of importance, places where we want to kind of advance thinking and connection to local government priorities. So that's kind of where this fits in. Studies for specialized populations. So we just completed a regional study for seniors and people with disabilities. We also have a role in managing the programming of federal and state funds that go to the transit providers. And finally, and probably the thing people know the most about the RTA, is that we're the only authority that can actually go to the ballot under our own legislation and get potentially additional funding regionally for transit and multimodal initiatives. Whereas SMART has a taxing authority that provides it funding. It actually does not have the authority to go for a regional initiative. And there's we could have a whole nother presentation about that, and I'm happy to do that when you guys want to get into it. But just broad context, the RTA, although it started in 2012, didn't really get up and running till about 2014, really 2015. There was kind of a full out sprint to complete a master plan and locally preferred alternatives, as we call them. So these are alternatives analysis, where we look at major corridors and potential transit investments. So in 2016, we completed a bus rapid transit locally preferred alternative for the Woodward corridor. It actually was a little bit earlier than that. Now that I can think of it, it was actually in 2015. So that is something that has been on the RTA's radar and part of a planning process that we probably should start kind of reopening and talking about as we're moving forward and redoing some regional planning documents. One last thing I want to say, again, broad context of RTA. We are in the process of updating the full regional transit master plan. We're just about to start the process. That's going to start with a briefing book that is a as short as possible version of where we are today, what are our goals and strategies going forward, and then we'll get into community engagement and actually having a final planning document probably sometime in the fall of 2021. So you're going to see a lot of active conversation from the RTA and stakeholders over the next 8 months or so. So where does this study fit in? So mobility-oriented development was kind of a concept that's in the planning realm, but something I kind of appropriated and tried to make fit for our region. The idea really simply is we've had a lot of conversations about what transit-oriented development looks like around our major transit stations, and particularly on Woodward. Transit-oriented development being focused on the land use side of things, on walkable, mixed use, things kind of within a walkable distance, quarter, half mile of a transit station. The mobility-oriented development part kind of broadens the envelope out and says, well, how are people who aren't within the walking distance able to connect to our regional transit stations? The impetus and the idea of this study was to introduce that idea of mobility-oriented development, provide some guidance and ways for local governments to kind of make investments or look at ways they can leverage their assets, their regional transit assets, so their transit stops, particularly on lines like FAST along Woodward that are regional in nature and express, to find some mobility connections that can make transit along the corridor more convenient. So one of the things that we hear a lot when we talk about we're going to make an investment on Woodward is, well, how do I get to Woodward? What do I, do I walk? Do I ride? Is it park and ride? Is it an Uber? Is it all these other options? Is it another transit route? And then develop some targeted action plans for economic development and mobility enhancements to basically give to local governments to say, here's a menu of things that you can look to do to provide a better connection to your existing major regional transit stops. It is not a mandate to do anything. It's not the RTA telling you to do one thing or the other. It's just a menu of things that you can look at doing. So when you're looking at your capital programming and your planning efforts, you can say, oh, this is a good idea. This matches with what we were thinking of doing. And maybe it's something that we can work together or work in partnership with SMART or MDOT to advance. That's all it is. It's just a menu. It also gives us a way, we piloted this on the Woodward corridor. I think I have the picture here. I'll flip down. We piloted this on the Woodward and the Ann Arbor to Detroit rail corridor. So it gives us a methodology for when we talk to folks on the Gratiot corridor, Grand River, Fort Street, Van Dyke, Michigan, other major regional transit corridors, a way to kind of interact with local governments, talk about how do we start making these connections. So that was kind of the idea. I just put the deliverables up so you knew that there was, maybe you've just seen the action plan. There's a whole series of studies and other things that are really interesting that supported that. These are all available on the RTA site. Existing conditions analysis, market analysis, stakeholder workshop, feedback, station typologies, mobility gap analysis, station readiness analysis, and then the final action plan. So I just wanted folks to know that we dove into a lot of different topics along the way. Oops, let's keep going. So very broadly, the idea is bringing together two themes and trying to identify each regional transit stop with two themes. One of them is what we call a station typology. And that is really on the land use side. So we basically say your station is a neighborhood center, a town center, or a core city. And all that does is set realistic expectations and goals and visions for, we don't expect downtown Birmingham to look like Midtown Detroit. They're just not in scale with each other. So when we talk about TOD in these very broad and generic terms, you need density everywhere and high building, all this stuff. That scale is going to look different in Birmingham. It's going to look different in Bloomfield Hills. It's going to look different in Ferndale. So trying to see like what's the scale we're looking at here. The other piece is this mode of emphasis idea. So this gets to the mobility part of things. So looking at, are there different types of modes? And we kind of had three broad categories: biking and micromobility, transit, microtransit, ride hailing, and park and ride. Are there different stops that feel like they're more, this is really more of a park and ride stop? It probably makes more sense based on land use, mobility conditions, what exists there today, what the infrastructure is like, what the the local government stakeholders we are speaking with are interested in. What are these modes of emphasis? And just kind of, again, helps us kind of direct and understand what may make sense going forward. So you can see the full corridor here and kind of see how everybody was assigned within the study. This study was kind of purposely done with where we interacted directly with planning and community development folks in each community. It was intentionally not kind of a public facing process. It was something for us to work with staff and really dig into some, so it gets very wonky. It's not a study I would ever really say is like, this is for the, this is great for public engagement. It's very technical. I think it helps set up public engagement and discussions going forward. What's the other thing I wanted to identify here? Just, I'm sure you guys have every study you've had, anything you've worked on, about halfway through this, we went into COVID mode. So this is one that we were in the middle of going through workshops and had to pivot. I think we still ended up with a good product, but we did pretty good. But it was tricky to be halfway through and then to pivot. But I'm sure we're all dealing with that in many facets. So the final product of this is what we call the action plan. So this zeroes in on the station area, talks about, okay, we assigned this typology, these kind of overlays. Here's some of the mode of emphasis pieces. Again, the final document has this broken down. I put these little like red things in here so you could kind of understand our method to our madness. So the action category, what you see here on number 2 is kind of, is this something that has to do with the place itself, something that has to do with connectivity, mobility, connecting to the site? Is it something that has to do with like a regulatory or development thing? So that's kind of what the numbers on the side are. The recommended action speaks for itself. The implementer are the folks or the agency that we thought was probably most geared towards implementing this action. Again, it's not the RTA saying you need to do this. It's just, this is something under your jurisdiction. You can see it runs the gambit from the city to MDOT to the RTA to SMART. Anything on this list is something that I know Robert would agree with me, we'd want to work in partnership on. So that's ultimately how any of us are going to be successful. And the other piece is kind of short-term, long-term, just kind of looking at, hey, this is maybe something we could look at short. This is a little bit longer. Every piece is set up the same way. 14 Mile is the other Birmingham stop. Action plans are set up the same way. I can see just very briefly, we talk about lighting, pedestrian crossing safety, implementing potentially micro transit connectivity, upgrades to alley designs, managing the curb, park and ride. And then when you get into kind of the orange territory, this is more like, I guess this is partially Royal Oak too. So, TOD overlays and things that can be done in kind of the zoning and land use side of things. My slightly insidious reason for trying to do this, and I don't know if I'm going to be able to pull this off. Sometimes the RTA lives in a world of we're trying to do something new here. That's a lot of what we're doing. Is I am enamored with this program that the Chicago RTA runs, which is called Access to Transit. It is a grant program where they provide local match, but they work with their metropolitan planning organization to secure CMAQ funding to do, it's about 13.7 million over the last several years, but I just want to show you to do projects like this. So they take grant applications from local government agencies. They work with the MPO to get CMAQ funding, which is congestion mitigation, air quality funding, federal funding that flows through the state to SEMCOG and is available for projects like this, sometimes depending on the region. Projects like this is the type of thing that we're thinking about. So when the RTA is talking about larger planning initiatives, funding programs we may want to put into a ballot initiative, this is one of the types of programs we would want to have in there, so we could work directly with local communities to make these types of investments. And ultimately, that's what I wanted to try and get out of this study, is what are the local on the ground things that we can do. Maybe it ends up in the ballot initiative or in the master plan. Maybe we're able to figure out funding through partnership to really advance that connectivity to your existing regional transit stations. I should have put my contact in here, and I apologize for that. I was doing this kind of fast today. So, but I know Janet will provide my contact as needed. So I will stop there and take any questions.
Yeah, let's open it up to dialogue from the board. If you could, well, I'm on my iPad, so I can't really see who's going to raise their hand. So I guess if we could just try to do this in an orderly fashion, that would be great.
David Lurie's got his hand up.
Go ahead. Great. Thanks.
Did you take into account what residents may want, what taxpayers want in Birmingham?
So we work directly with the local government officials and tried to identify things that cross-reference with their planning documents. When we go out to do more specific engagement, like if we were going to do a project, we would go out and work with the city to do specific engagement on that project.
I
So
guess
again, we're kind of coming from this high level all the way down.
Right.
Yeah.
I guess the question is, the city government may want it, but maybe the citizens don't want it. Maybe the residents don't want it. You know, you talked about greater density being fostered by encouraging affordable housing. Well, I'm not sure in Birmingham where you're going to find that. Freeing up land for development. You know, I guess I don't see resident, you know, being a longtime resident of Birmingham, I don't see residents wanting some of the things that you put in this overview. And that was why I asked the question, you know, maybe the city government wants it, and, you know, master plan and micro transit, which I had to look up, and micro mobility, which I had to look up. But I'm not sure the residents want it. So anyway, those are my comments.
Okay.
Yeah, Ben, maybe I'll jump in here for a second. I would commend the entire team for thinking differently and bringing forward ideas that make us look up words and terms that we may not know. So I appreciate that. I do think there's an element of always the initial thinking what could be the possibility, and then there's the intersection of the art of the possible, what do the collective body of residents want and feel. And the question I would specifically have that keeps me awake at night at times is, we have an opportunity across Woodward amongst multiple cities, and I see that as a huge challenge in front of us relative to, it's not just, you know, we've all heard the word, we have a bike path that goes to nowhere. I don't think, at least if I was to say my legacy, is that we have those situations at a grander scale where we have too much of a hyper local situation going on, and other cities are bigger, like Ann Arbor or Troy, and they may be able to kind of create a bigger network. I think Birmingham's like 3 miles by 2 miles. So how do we, as an organization within, as a board team within Birmingham, start to think outside of just Birmingham? Because again, if we're trying to connect beyond the 2x3, there's some challenges I think that come there.
Yeah, and I think from you know, I'm just from the regional transit perspective, so I'll give you that perspective. And I think that honestly, at maybe the highest level, is what we're trying to do here, right? Is to connect the residents of Birmingham to larger regional access. Woodward and the existing fast service, and what, you know, any improvements that may come through additional investment, is that spine, right? And connecting people to that spine is what we are trying to drive at here. Is trying to say, and I've had very specific conversations with people where they're like, okay, I understand you want to make Woodward a better transit service, you might put BRT, whatever. I don't know how I'm going to get there. I don't see how I get from my house there. So this is like an attempt to say, okay, well, we looked at the planning studies you had and trying to see if we could connect in the network. Maybe there's these other options, but we're trying to show how that, you know, we use this term first last mile. I would broaden that out a little bit to connect you into a system that gives you broader access. So that's, again, highest level, like what we're trying to do through this study. Is that helpful?
The last 50 mile is a big challenge. So I appreciate that. I think that my question is really, how do we supersize what we want to do at a multi-walkable, multimodal scale not just in our 2x3? How do we connect out? So we can talk more about that. I want to open it up for other discussions. I see, Andrew, you've got your hand up, but I'll yield the floor here to you, Andrew.
Thank you.
Sorry, I have cackling kids behind me, so I apologize. I'm trying to go ahead. Yes, sir.
Mine have come through the door at least once already.
Yeah.
Thank you for the presentation. Thank you for this. These sorts of documents and the linking within them shows an enormous amount of work that is put into these. I do mean enormous, because it's not small to look at each individual piece of the puzzle. And then I did try going through some of the linkings into the SMART. So there are 2 links to SMART within the Birmingham portion. I was trying to process through them today, and I must admit I didn't absorb everything I probably could have done yet.
Okay.
But Johanna's got a good point about how do we integrate with everything. But Dave also had a very valid point about residents, neighborhoods, and alignment between cities plans. I mean, right now I can only really look at the city plan within Birmingham, not being very knowledgeable about what's happening in some of the other cities that are on the steps of the pathway that you're showing here. But I do have to say, some of the questions that I had in the last meeting, where I was questioning the Q&A that I brought up, some of them were directly related to this, because parts of it do appear to be, for want of a better word, interfering with Birmingham and Birmingham's own concepts for the future, which are fairly hotly debated right now as it is. If I just pick the 14-mile piece of the puzzle right now, just because I'm more familiar with it. I mean, you show a park and ride that's 1 block away from Dr. Schaefer's office. I have no idea where you're going to find a park and ride. And taking up the IXL, which is a daycare, I'm not sure if you'll get more than about 4 cars in there, because they use it for drop-offs for the kids anyway. So I question some bits of this. I have arrows number 3, the Troy Microtransit Zone. I'm going to break it to you gently. The pathway that you're pointing towards Woodward is across a whole bunch of what we call unimproved streets. And Dr. Schaefer was on that board as well, so she knows just how bad those streets are. Mine's one of them, and I describe it as looking like the aftermath of an artillery strike. And I'm really not joking.
Yeah.
It's that bad. There is a kid rides his dirt bike up and down my street and practices off-roading on it. There's not a lie. You're looking at microtransit zones in areas that haven't been considered, and they're outside the scope of your regional transit. They're not in pathways within your regional transit. You're just trying to connect the dots. So Woodward through to the train station. And that's where I kind of have the issues that I think Dave was bringing up as well, that I understand the plan, but it's not really considering cities and what they're doing. Our 2040 plan is contentious, to say the least. There are some fairly polarized opinions, and I'll put myself in one of the polls, and it's not necessarily the one that's for everything in the plan. It's, if you did, I didn't see what you're looking at, because 2040, a lot of the changes that we have going on, they're changing the structure, the layout. It's looking for changes to Woodward itself. For instance, taking Woodward down to a 35 mile an hour, 3-lane, improved crossings. That's part of the vision in there. To me, that's the starting point that ties into what you're looking to do for transit accessibility, parking, being able to enable parking points, bike share points, micro transit points, ride hailing points. I don't see that integrated into this whatsoever. What I see is outside of the corridor. And that's where I have the same concerns that Dave does. Could you maybe walk us through some thoughts on this, just to educate us as to how, as the regional transit authorities, plural, are looking at this and comparing it to what cities, residents actually have in their plans as well? Very long-winded, I apologize.
Yeah, no, and so that's totally fine, and it's completely fair. So a couple of things I want to put out there. One, we very purposely worked with city staff that we hope would help provide this input to us. That's the purpose, because from RTA perspective, it's hard for me to know every single plan, every single detail of every single thing. So that's why we tried to do it this way. Obviously, we were not totally successful, maybe in this regard. Those plans change and evolve. These are concepts that we would change and evolve to whatever the local government and residents actually wanted when and if we move towards implementation. So it's not fixed in stone. We're not sitting here saying, well, in this plan, we said this, now you guys are doing that. We'd want to evolve that along with however the community wants to evolve it. It's not on us to dictate how this may look. Some of the mapping stuff, yes, it's not perfect precision as to this street, that street. It's more just arrows that show kind of general connections and other things like that. We did on this study not really focus on Woodward as a main line, because we have done studies like that before, and that's kind of an evolving conversation. So it was a little bit more focused on connecting into Woodward as opposed to up and down Woodward. So that may be a little bit of the kind of wonkiness you're seeing when you're talking about changes in the 2040 plan that are directed at Woodward. And as with every planning document, this is the idea is that it's a completely living and breathing thing, right? So as things evolve, we look at this and we try and work in partnership to figure out how best to move it forward. This is a snapshot in time. So hopefully I answered your question.
Thanks, Ben. I see two hands. Jana, I'm going to go to you first here real quick. What do you want to add?
Thank you. I just wanted to point out that, Mr. Hague, you make good points about the draft 2040 plan. That wasn't something that the RTA considered because we can only provide them with approved and adopted plans because we don't know where the 2040 plan is going to end up yet. So that wasn't part of the discussion for this project, because it's too soon to say where that's going to end up. As you pointed out, it's contentious and we're going to have a lot of changes between now and the final product, and they can't rely on it from a higher level because it isn't formally finished or adopted. So I just wanted to point that out.
Okay, I see another hand. Robert, you want to jump in? Oh, yeah, you can hear me, right? Okay.
Yeah, I just wanted to add a little bit to Ben's comments. These are really good points in discussion. I think maybe something that I would add, from SMART's perspective, part of what this project was doing was kind of balancing things that are going to be either in place or are being implemented. But I think it's important to remember also that I don't think that you'd want a plan like this to attempt to tie into your local decisions to that degree anyway. And I think Ben kind of touched on this a little bit. I think it's more of just it's a toolbox of sorts, trying to acknowledge some of the conditions in the field, talk about improvements that could be made. I think in your comments, one of the board member comments was related to really focusing on things we could do in the right of way. And I think if you look at some of the what will seem like simpler stuff, the stuff that pops out is like, hey, you should be taking extra property, you should be upsizing your buildings, you should be putting in like all sorts of extra density. I think that those are more of things that successful mobility-oriented development and infrastructure can support. Not necessarily that we're expecting the plan, whatever, is expecting you to do those things in order to like earn the other stuff. And so I think a lot of the improvements, one of the last slides, or the last slide Ben mentioned, was the Chicago RTA, setting aside money for transit access improvements, basically. So crosswalks, sidewalks, better bus infrastructure. That was something we focused on with FAST. I don't want to go too far down this rabbit hole, but for FAST, rather than come to the communities and say, hey, we need you all to put in, $20 million a piece so we can build a new lane on Woodward and put in like these hardscape, heated buildings and stuff. We said, hey, what can we do within our current infrastructure so that we're increasing the level of service along the way? So we put in what we call enhanced shelters, which Birmingham has either one or two now. I can't remember where we are in installation, that has next bus arrival screens, a little more lighting. But that's the kind of stuff that we're trying to increase the effectiveness of the transit, tying in things like crosswalk improvements, narrowing down the number of lanes on Woodward, decreasing the speed, making it more walkable. All those things build off each other, and then could lead you to, if you had aspirations or goals for trying to do more density or a different mix of uses, those can be supported. So I think it's important, at least from my perspective, the microtransit is something SMART is implementing in March. We have a test zone that's kind of in Troy to see how that kind of service works. But all of these things are really improvements that link together to support more walkable communities that then can lead to kind of whatever you want it to be. And I don't think you'd want a plan like this to come in and say, well, Birmingham, if they want the benefits, Birmingham has to look like this and Royal Oak has to look like that. It's really about, hey, what are things we can do that can support you being able to do more of what you want to do, regardless of what your goals might be. So just a few kind of random thoughts there, but thanks for letting me chime in.
Yeah, good conversation. You want to jump back in, Andrew?
Please. Thank you to both Ben and Robert on that. And Jenny, you're absolutely right. The plan isn't set in stone, but Johanna touched on it, and Robert, you somewhat elaborated on it. And Johanna talked about the connecting of both sides of Woodward with improved crossings and what have you. And Robert, you're right. You don't want to be coming in and saying, Birmingham, you want to do this, but we want you to do that. The bit that I think you touched on quite nicely is if you actually focus on the piece that you can influence, that is not Birmingham, which is Woodward. Woodward is a state road. Birmingham has wishes and desires. Johanna basically touched on that. How to improve crossings across this road, which Birmingham can't unilaterally say, we're going to do this, because we're not allowed to. But that's where I'm saying, perhaps with the plan that we have, Birmingham 2040, there are elements that are actually looking at this state road and the state road interface and the state road crossings and the access across, the access north-south on this corridor. That to me would be something where, be it 2040 Plan Birmingham or Birmingham Future or the State of Michigan Future, we probably could align certain key elements there anyway, even prior to 2040 Plan being agreed and adopted in its final form, because we have a common theme, we have a common desire for an improvement on that piece of the puzzle that is not within each of our hands, but collectively we could possibly influence what happens there and then grow out from it, because as it grows out, then it's each individual city's responsibility what they do within their borders and can work with plans. But maybe the framework, I have a separate screen, that's why I'm waving over there. The framework is one thing, but then to bring the focus down from the grand plan and say, okay, here are the key points we think we can address the most effectively, and then here's the secondary, tertiary, quaternary, etc. And perhaps that's where we can work more in alignment, because, and I keep on saying back to Johanna, but she's kind of summed it up. It's a key theme in Birmingham that it's a bisected city. Truly, it's two cities that have this 8-lane divider. Well, if you can't bridge that divide, then it's two cities. And one of the things you're looking at doing is helping with that. So all I'm really saying is you brought up great points. Let's focus it and see how we can work together to improve the common themes here.
And Andrew, what a great job you just did of segueing into the next presentation.
Yep. It's like got some people who can answer those questions, right?
Yeah, exactly, which is on those very topics. So before we move on though, is there anything else on? What's that?
Oh, I think
this is my public speaking politician job. I just now and I'll be all good.
Robert,
I also can I say one thing? I always like to say this just so I am a proud graduate of Seaholm High School, grew up in Birmingham, so I'm very much aware of crossing Woodward at 15 and rode my bike through downtown and rode my bike all through Birmingham. So I am fairly keenly aware and, have a special place in my heart for the city. So I do, want to keep working on these issues and, really appreciate all the dialogue and want to keep going with it. So just wanted to say that. Yeah.
Thank you. And this is what we're all here for, right? It's this healthy diverse dialogue that is open to all suggestions and ideas, even as uncomfortable as they make us feel. So one more hand up before we move on to the next topic. Robert, did you want to jump back in for a sec?
Yeah, just a quick closing comment. Well, first of all, Ben, maybe you should have led with that at the beginning of your presentation, just a suggestion for next time.
I know. I'll work on it.
Yeah, and hopefully I'm not painting the next presenters into too much of a corner, but I think a really good example of summarizing kind of our whole conversation here is Ferndale is at the point right now with their reconstruction project of Woodward to be able to push for some of the changes to achieve similar goals for them. So kind of narrowing the number of through lanes. And that's something that we are ready to support them with, because obviously we have services there as well. And this is exactly the kind of thing that will help kind of synchronize and get us all on the same page so that we're able to, be good partners with MDOT, see when there's opportunities like that to put in better transit amenities, which can include sidewalks and crossings and stuff. The more that we have conversations like this, I think the better partners all of us can be to getting things done that turns out to go full circle actually are the things that you specifically as a community would like to see. So just wanted to get that in there. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really excellent point to add. We're kind of at the two ends of the byway, if you want to call it that, right? We've got Ferndale and Birmingham, and although there are opportunities outside of that, I think that was a great way to frame it up. So, Jana, do we want to move on to the second topic?
I would think so, yes. Do you want me to introduce our folks?
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Well, as Mr. Haig just gave us this lovely segue and introduction into Woodward Avenue, some issues and opportunities, as I phrased it on the agenda. This comes up a lot at the Multi-Modal Board, obviously, because it is the great divide through the city of Birmingham and many other communities, of course, along the corridor. Where there's always comments, well, why can't we do this? Why can't we do that? And it is a state highway and it is under the jurisdiction of the Michigan Department of Transportation. So we did bring some of the experts from MDOT in with us tonight to kind of talk to you about some of these issues, maybe discuss some of their ongoing plans, and maybe hear from you as to what some of the items are that we're all looking at. And then I think Julie Kroll is going to give you a little bit of an update, because we are studying a few issues along the Woodward area, just from that you brought up at the last meeting or 2 meetings ago, I'm not sure. So we have Lori Swanson from MDOT, we have Jim Schultz from MDOT, and we have Tom Pozzolo, I hope I pronounced that right, from MDOT, and then I understand Josh Carey as well. So I will turn it over to you.
Right, I'll start off. I'm Jim Schultz. I'm the Metro Region Planner. And taking off from Ben's, I didn't go to Seaholm High School, but I live in Troy and I work in Southfield, so I travel through Birmingham a lot, maybe more so before COVID, but I did today because I just flew back from Orlando, Florida, and so I drove through Birmingham to get home. So I'm very familiar, and I'm glad to see the restaurants are reopening. I'm going to give the 50,000 foot level some of the projects that MDOT's been doing. I know if you think of MDOT, you probably think more about the I-75 modernization perhaps, but we've actually been pretty active on doing some other things. So let me give you a flavor for that. A few years ago, the city of Detroit challenged MDOT to put some protected bike lanes in some of our arterials in the city of Detroit. So we did that first on Michigan Avenue through downtown and Corktown. Then they asked us on a similar vein to do it on Grand River from Cass to I-94. This past couple of years, we did a complete reconstruct of Grand River from Southfield to Beck. And you can see that transformation. Probably closer to home to you, the city of Detroit did Livernois. But they're similar in flavor in that, you're trying to add some landscaping, wider sidewalks, slow traffic down, but basically make it a more walkable, friendly street. The other thing we've been doing I had some discretionary funds probably the last 4 or 5 years. And so we've been partnering with all the communities along Woodward to plant trees. So we do these 50-50 partnerships to plant trees in the Woodward median, and Birmingham's been very proactive in taking advantage of that. We also did some work at the I-696 Woodward interchange, which is terrible for pedestrians, but we did some work with the zoo, Royal Oak and Pleasant Ridge. Then probably, I think we talked a little bit about connectivity of some of the bike paths. So one of the things we've been working on with SEMCOG is developing a multimodal toolkit. What is that? So one part of it is to develop these, what we call network overlays of auto, freight, transit, bike, and ped networks, overlay them all and see where there's conflicts, which you can imagine. Let's say on Woodward, everybody wants pedestrians, bike lanes, transit only lanes, auto lanes, freight lanes. So how do we resolve all that? So one of the problems the traffic engineers at MDOT have had for years is whenever we did it, what's called a road diet, which was basically reduce the number of lanes for auto traffic, was do we only use level of service or volume to capacity ratings, which are engineering jargon, but we realized we didn't have measures to look at, are we improving pedestrian mobility, bike mobility, transit access? You could argue we didn't have measures for that, so then it was hard to say whether we were improving them or not. So with SEMCOG, we've developed this toolkit, which is in beta testing as we speak. And we'll be looking forward to applying that in the future. More specifically, I know a couple of years ago, Birmingham was looking at better pedestrian crossings at Maple, and they were hoping with the Peabody project and a project at the southeast corner that there might be a chance to have an overhead pedestrian crossing, and that never happened. And so then we're looking at more practical alternatives to increase pedestrian movements across Woodward. And I think Lori and Tom will be better to discuss where we stand with that, and also where we stand with the Ferndale Pleasant Ridge discussion. But before we do that, I wanted to bring up one of the challenges of the Pleasant Ridge Ferndale discussion, which Ben brought up to us, is the community was approaching MDOT to say we want protected bike lanes, but we also want to keep our on-street parking. So the only way to do that, of course, is to take a travel lane out of commission. So then we're working with the cities to do some modeling to see if that's going to cause gridlock or whether that's really possible. And then Ben brought up, he says, well, how do we look at that? Would you rather have a transit only lane or the bike ped lane? So really it gets into a regional versus local challenge, right? Regionally, maybe we do want transit only lane, and the community may want a protected bike lane. How do we resolve that? So I don't have a crystal ball to say how we'll resolve it, but those are some of the issues that'll challenge us. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Lori and Tom to perhaps talk about Maple and Woodward and some of the discussions they've been familiar with.
Hi, I'm Lori Swanson. I'm the Oakland TSC manager, and really, we just sat down with Julie earlier this week. I don't know, my weeks meld together when working from home. I kind of feel like I'm always working, but anyway, and we talked about some possibility of, doing some modifications to the intersection. And MDOT's always willing to be a partner, always willing to sit down and discuss ideas. But for us, it comes down to data and analysis and everything like that. And when it's really hard for us to compare Maple and Woodward to like 9 and Woodward, because north of 696 is very different traffic wise than it is south of 696. And so, you know, just like we were willing to sit down with Ferndale and talk about possibly, you know, doing a road diet, we would do the same thing with Birmingham. And it's really up to you guys to prove to us that it would work. And so, you know, that's just kind of a, you know, I don't know, just an honest look at what, you know, our role in this. You know, MDOT is generally, we are here to move traffic safely and efficiently. And as Jim said, you know, multimodal transportation is starting to take, you know, more of a step forward in our thinking, but we are to move vehicles. So, because even though you guys would like to have a road diet through there, you know, and if we did it without looking at the data behind it, we would get creamed, you know, and people would be calling us and the governor and everybody else, and it would be a mess. So whatever we do, we have to have the data and analysis behind it so that we can present that to the public and say, this is what we, you know, we base our decisions on. So with that, I don't know, do you want to talk about your ideas or your requests? Or, I mean, we're here to discuss. We didn't present or make a presentation. We weren't exactly sure about everything you wanted to discuss. We thought this was more just going to be, you know, asking us questions or whatever. So.
Yeah, I think we can certainly offer up some, I mean, things that are on our minds. I will open it up to the board members first as questions that have come up or thinking on what we can certainly have even just an open dialogue if that's helpful.
I have a question.
Jump in, go ahead.
Okay, thanks. So I guess two things. One is what you mentioned that you'd get creamed if you didn't have the right data. So I guess the question is what data needs to be collected in order for changes to be made?
Yeah, we have a road diet checklist and we can get a copy over. I don't know, Julie, you might have that already. And there's a whole list of things that we will require. We would require traffic counts to be taken. Now's not a great time to take counts because of COVID, traffic volumes are down. But looking at, Tom, do you know things? I mean, we asked, I think there's modeling, you have to have a public meeting. I mean, there's a whole list of things that I just don't have it on the top of my head.
Okay, the second question I had was, and that's helpful, if it'd be nice to see the checklist, but again, if you ask residents that live, I'd say half a mile either side of Woodward, especially Maple and Woodward. The biggest problem they have with Woodward right now is between May and October, the noise level is unbearable. It from screeching car tires to drag racing or whatever. And we've talked, the city commission has talked about what could be done. It's come up in the city commission meetings. And basically, the answer we get is it's a state road and the Birmingham police don't have the right laws for noise. And what I see is a lot of this finger pointing. And again, from the residents' point of view, that's what they would say about Maple and Woodward. And from a pedestrian point of view, that drag racing or whatever the hell goes on from those 6 months of warmer weather makes it unsafe for pedestrians along the side of the road, for people waiting for a bus or crossing Woodward. So I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, I actually appreciate the tension that you just brought up there, which is that our city and our residents want to walk our 2 to 3 miles and plus more.
Mhm.
And the mantra of moving automotive traffic is kind of in a pretty big conflict of that. And although we understand the histories of Woodward, we all love the Dream Cruise or hate the Dream Cruise, depending on where you live or how much you've had to interact with it. We all have our certainly our feelings on it. I think that if you pair what was shared earlier with road diets and data and things, we did something similar when we moved Maple down 3 lanes, right? We heard lots of, there's lots of traffic, there's lots of zooming around, it's very unsafe. And we heard the other side of the coin too. So I think we recognize, at least some of us maybe, of what we would be up against. But I do think, and I'm going to stress this further, is Woodward is not for us it's just 2 miles, but most of us don't just travel 2 miles on Woodward. So I do think that the position that MDOT and the RTA and others should take should be more holistic for the greater good of the total Woodward, with inputs from the cities, with the residents included, with the data. I know that's very complex, but I really hope that I'm not going to drive through, I'm just going to say this maybe bluntly, I hope I'm not going to drive through Ferndale with 3 lanes and then open it. It's going to be this sort of necking. It just doesn't feel like we've done the service to the entire corridor. But I'll pause there. Andrew, you want to jump in next?
He actually said it kind of nicely. Ferndale at 3 lanes, except you left out Ferndale 3 lanes, 35 miles an hour, with some very, very aggressive Ferndale policing on that. Trust me, used to live there. And then 4 lanes of Woodward at 45. That, to Dave's point, yeah, it's not actually 45. I want to ask Laurie a question though. You said right now, not a good time for traffic count because traffic's down. So because we don't have the checklist, does that mean lower traffic means the road's fine, no problem, or lower traffic means there's the opportunity for the road to be reduced in size and still sustain the same volume? Because honestly, I kind of grasped on that one point and thinking, if we're seeing lower traffic volumes, does 3 lanes support the traffic volume right now? Because I mean, I suspect many of us are going to go through the same thing that work for larger companies. I've been told basically my office is, we're closing buildings. We are permanently not going back to the office on any full-time basis. So
I think that we're at a point where we really don't know what the future holds, and to do counts right now, do a study and put all of our eggs in that basket and say, this is the way it's going to be in the future, is probably not really the wisest thing. There's going to be people who do go back, and there's going to be a lot of people that don't. So I think that we need to figure, we need time to find out what that is. I mean, we're just now approaching the 1 year where everyone started working from home, and I know we're supposed to go back May 1st, but I don't know, what that means. But for us to base an analysis on the traffic volumes right now might be premature.
We do a comparative analysis, because surely there's some previously existing data for however old it may be. I mean, within the last 5 years, someone must have done something along the Woodward corridor.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah, I mean,
analysis to now. I mean, what you're looking at, this has been my office for 2 years. It's going to be my office for forever, because my building, it's not going to really exist. One of the buildings I use, it's gone. So what I'm looking at is, I'm one piece of the picture, but if we had, here's data from within the last 5 years, here's 2021, and then we can then, over the period of years, because this is not something that would happen, hey, we're going to the legislature and it gets fixed before the end of the year. It's not happening. But you have to build up all the data. It's like the presentations we put together, they weren't put together in 5 minutes. They are many, many, many months of a lot of work, a lot of analysis. What I'm suggesting is we start the data collection. And if now is an anomalous point, it'll show up as anomalous, or if now is a part of a curve, then it will show as being on that curve. The question is it the bottom of the curve? Is it the middle of the curve? We don't know. But if we have old data, no data, and then in the future, we have a blank spot. So that's all I'm looking for is there, could we take this opportunity to start building up the information for what will no doubt take several years to try and implement anyway?
You guys are always welcome to take traffic count data. You know, I don't know, Tom Pizzolo, who is our Oakland TSC operations engineer, is here tonight, and so is Josh Carey. He's our region traffic and safety engineer. And you know, I guess Tom, Josh, what are your thoughts on traffic volumes right now?
Well, obviously right now the traffic volumes are low. We don't really, I mean, the whole idea of taking the traffic counts is we want to make sure that if we do anything to Woodward, that we maintain a certain level of service, whether that'll depend on what the volumes of traffic is going through each intersection. Right now, I don't think we have representative samples, so we couldn't do anything with that. I mean, essentially, we have to estimate what the traffic is going to look like, and then that'll translate to a certain level of service for vehicles. So,
I think the other thing that's going on is with lower volumes, you're having higher traffic speeds, regardless of what the posted speed is. So you're like, well, that's not good either for pedestrians. If the traffic's going by and if it's posted 45, it's probably 55 on Woodward these days. And so you're like, oh, that's not a trend I want to look at either. So I think all of it's bad, right? If we had higher volumes like we did in 2019, you would think with congestion, the speeds would be lower versus what we have today. So one of the things I know some COG's doing on their long range travel modeling is they're trying to do what you suggest, look at volumes from 2019 and project those in the future, let's say a 1% growth rate a year. And then versus what happens if, you know, only half the workforce goes back to the office? How does that change traffic volumes in the peak hour? But I think everybody's trying to get a handle on what are the dynamics of this. And then even if there's no longer long commutes, let's say like I do from Troy to Southfield, does that mean there'll be more local traffic within Birmingham and Troy where people are just doing local pickup and deliveries of projects? Will there be more Amazon deliveries that you got to worry about? So there's a lot going on in this space where people are trying to get their arms around it.
Yeah, one quick thing, and then I think I see your hand, Andrew. Tom, did you have your hand up earlier though? Okay, why don't I'll pause there for a second. Why don't you jump in?
Okay, two unrelated questions. First, I want to peel back to something Laura, a complete novice, and please educate me. You said at some point, oh, Ferndale and Birmingham are different because the traffic flow south of 696 is so different than it is north of 696. And to me, I was going like, they are? Besides the speed limit, now the speed limit in Ferndale is somewhat less, but it seems to me like they're very similar so that we could learn a lot from Ferndale. Is that a wrong way to think about it? Like, why are they so different?
The traffic volumes are a lot less. I want to say
Right.
half.
Yeah,
So more,
that's
much
what
more
I mean.
down there.
Traffic volumes are less pretty much south of 696 than they are north,
Okay.
which means that when they did the modeling to look at existing conditions versus future with the road diet, it was, you know, it tends to be more conducive, and it's just my opinion right now because it hasn't been modeled in Birmingham, but my guess is you're not going to get the same results.
So we're likely to be above a threshold where a road dieting would be effective. Is that what you're saying?
I'm just saying that
Which we have to prove with data, of course.
the volumes I think are higher in Birmingham, which might create more congestion.
Okay. The second is a question I've always wanted to ask. So in my previous working life, I used to travel to Japan and China a lot, too much. And when they have, typically over there, especially in Japan, when they have a road like Woodward, and they don't have a lot of them, the speeds aren't as high, but when there's a lot of pedestrians like we want to encourage here, they often approach, especially when there's a big construction project we had, the idea of underground passage for pedestrians and bicycles. And is that just cost prohibitive so much that we would never consider it here? Is it something you guys think about? And is there, to envision a possibility with all the construction that's likely, especially around Maple, that kind of thing?
And I guess in that same light, to Tom's comment, we're talking about underground pedestrian. I'd also like to know the order of magnitude for pushing the traffic subterraneanly to create a level walkway to connect the east and west sides of Woodward.
Well, money is a huge obstacle for us.
So what is the order of magnitude that we're talking about?
I don't even know.
But
You're talking about recessing like Woodward? Is that what you're talking about?
you want to depress Woodward.
Yes.
Correct. For a section.
Or opening up some of those pedestrian tunnels. I know there was one in Birmingham, just around Oakland, and it's still there, but it's not used. It's blocked off. So I think their question is, one, what kind of thought have you put into providing underground pedestrian crossings and or putting the traffic underground at major intersections such as Maple and Woodward, and letting people have the surface level?
So you could argue we've done that at 696 and Woodward. I don't think you like that, do you?
There's
So,
an infrastructure
and then
that was built around that we wouldn't have, because you've got the cross. That's why I was wondering about Dave Hocker's question there. You're going to have to take all of that underground infrastructure out, and
but I mean,
that's the ungodly expensive bit.
the zoo and the Royal Oak, they were trying to encourage us to fill in the big ditch, as they called it. Now, the other alternative is what we have at St. Joseph Hospital up near Pontiac, where the hospital built a pedestrian overpass, and even closer to Birmingham is what Somerset Mall did. And I think that's what was envisioned if the Peabody project ever developed.
Well, I don't know that that was envisioned, certainly not on the city's perspective, but there were some folks around that were talking about it. The problem from a planning perspective is if you put a bridge in, an overpass, then the pedestrians are taken off the street. All of that street activity is gone, and the cars can zip as fast as they want underneath. So it's kind of counterintuitive to some of the goals, at least we have as a city.
Does anybody remember why that tunnel near Oakland was blocked off? Because I used to use that a long time ago.
I was told it was safety, that there were people decided they didn't feel safe. But I mean, I've brought it up more than once. Where I come from, because I actually want to circle back to the original question I had for Jim as well, but where I come from, across the whole of Europe, and I've lived in more than one place, pedestrian tunnels are everywhere. They're incredibly common. Modern technologies that we have today, if anybody was saying, but it's a tunnel and I don't feel safe. We have so many CCTVs around, stick a couple inside it, feed straight to the police control room. It can be monitored. It doesn't even need a person looking at it. You just put motion detection or person detection, which is a standard AI program. Costs you literally $100 for the program.
So I have a question here. What is it? What is the mechanism, or what does it take to further study the spectrum of Woodward, which I think we kind of started with this in the very beginning of our dialogue. But I mean, Andrew, I like how you kind of paraphrased it. Behaviors are changing. Whether we think of them as like long commuters or short commuters, how many people want to walk around in the middle of their lunch hour versus in the evening, because, you know, they're just patterns of humans and human behaviors are changing. And if there's opportunity further north of 696, how do we seize that opportunity? Do we have to request a study? Do we have to put some money behind it? Do we have to get some residents out on picket signs? I'm just being comical here, but how do we have to actually, what's the mechanism?
That's something within the city that you guys would do. You would cut, and we would help you identify what would be required in a study. And but MDOT would not fund it. That would be something the city would do. This is all stuff the city would need to fund and provide to us as support, and for all the things that are within the checklist.
So let me just make sure I heard you. Sorry, Andrew, I'm going to ask a very specific question here. You say the city, that sounds like a study being done in Birmingham. That's not my question. My question is Ferndale to Birmingham. What's the mechanism? Does Birmingham need to fund the entire project? Do we need to work with other cities, get other other teams involved? What does that take?
What do you mean Ferndale to Birmingham? You mean that whole entire stretch, like through Royal Oak and the whole entire way?
I'm saying let's not create a bunch of hourglasses on Woodward. How would we collectively as a, you know, I hear, you know, all this great work that's going on in Ann Arbor. Ann Arbor as a city is quite a bit larger. They're looking at autonomous things. They're looking at microtransit, and they've got a younger community. Don't get me wrong. But I think to say that the collective bit of Woodward is an opportunity for us to think about. And I would just say, as the chair of this board, let's not think about 2 miles of it. How do we think about the 8 miles of it? Well, probably 7 miles, from 8 Mile to 16 Mile, maybe even further.
Jim, I think that's kind of in your wheelhouse, where like that would be like a planning group or something.
So on Michigan Avenue, we're doing what's called a planning and environmental linkage study from downtown to I-96. So we're in the process of doing that. At the end of the day, if we reconstruct the road in any way, it's probably a $60 million project. Now, the problem on Woodward was we don't have any reconstruction projects in our book at the moment. So one of the things you'd have to do is do one of these studies. We can investigate how much that cost and if the state would be interested in pursuing that. But then at the end of the day, you got to come up with the funds to actually reconstruct the road.
Yeah, I recognize the implications of what happens when we decide to hit the go button. But
I will investigate what it would take to do a study on Woodward for you.
Thank you.
I think that's all I'm asking is what's that? That sort of feels like it's a free thinking, right? Let's think about what it actually might take. There's a lot of areas of Woodward, if you drive it much, that feel pretty desolate. There's a lot of businesses that are non-existent anymore. It feels as though, and I think it's said by a couple other board members, the behaviors, the traffic is down now. Let's do the thinking of what it might take. Let's go see how to partner with Royal Oak and other places, but at least we will have tried.
And then I will also try and hunt down the project we did on Grand River from Southfield to Beck. That was $8 million project, and then DWSD had a $5 million sewer and water project they coordinated. So it ended up being a $13 to $15 million project that we managed. But that's all wrapped up pretty much. But I'll get information on both those projects to Jana, and she can share it with you guys.
That's lovely. Any other questions from the board? I know, Andrew, you had your hand up. Why don't you jump back in?
Yeah, actually, Jim brought up something that actually tied into what Laurie was talking about, and it made me think of something else. Yet another from where I grew up, because we've experimented with an awful lot of stuff, and some of it's still in experimentation. Traffic volumes are down on Woodward. I'm just going to talk Woodward right now, and let's just say 696 north, because I want to exclude the Ferndale 35 mile an hour because of Johanna's point about bottlenecks or hourglassing. Volumes are down, speeds are up. Where in the US do we have active speed limit controls? And what I mean by that is in the UK, the M25 is fairly famous experiment for as the traffic volume goes up, the speed limits go down to try and avoid this surging of traffic. Would this, and this would not require road reconstruction at all. You don't touch the roadway. What you touch is you actively change the speed limit. So for instance, during rush hour, the speed limit might then be scaled from 45 down to 35, because the idea being you try and keep traffic flowing in a higher density and you try and reduce the stop-start. It could then also be actively changed at times of high stress, such as the evening drag races, that if the speed limit is 35 instead of 45, it makes their drag an awful lot shorter and an awful lot less appealing to go and do in any of these high density areas where there's an even more elevated chance of hurting someone. What about these active speed limits?
So I am aware of those on our freeways. I've never seen them on our arterial, but just so you know, in Michigan, the Michigan State Police established the speed limits. So if you ever have them come out and do a speed run on Woodward these days, they'd probably increase the posted speed from 45 to 55. So you probably don't want that to happen.
Yeah, I was aware of that, and it's trying to figure out how to avoid that, because it's what, 85th percentile or something.
Yes.
That
So
yeah.
that's a real problem these days, because people are driving faster than the speed limit. So if the state police come out, they're going to raise the speed limit. Now, the only short-term answer is to do more enforcement, but then your police end up being the bad guys, and you know all the residents hate them, right? I know even in a subdivision, when they have speeding people in a subdivision, they find out the people that are speeding are the residents that live there. So they go, oh no, we don't want that. And then I've seen in Birmingham, they have the flashing sign that tells you, like on Southfield, north of 14, it warns you that you're going from 45 in Southfield to 35 to 25. It flashes when you're going over that. And I think I've seen that on the roundabouts too, but short term, that's about the only thing you can do, I think.
Any other questions or dialogue we want to have today?
Sounds like I got some homework just to give you a couple things.
Sorry, not sorry. No, just kidding. We really appreciate if you could look that up for us and help us understand. I think, you know, again, I'll go back to behaviors are clearly changing. Whether 25, 50, or 75% go back, we're probably within the next year going to see elements of what that turns out to be. And we've all been educated on this board about trying to avoid too many short-term measures, as you've indicated, and think longer term. So
one of the things I want to end with, just so you know that MDOT's not the old MDOT, even though I'm old. Hopefully you're all aware of our I-375 projects going through the environmental process as we speak, where we're going to get rid of the freeway and make it an urban arterial. And presently that's scheduled for 2027 construction. And then another project that I'm project manager on is for the current Amtrak station in New Center area. We're going to move the Greyhound bus station from Howard Street up to that location and build a multimodal transit center that's mixed use. And we're trying to incorporate all the things that Ben talked to about the mobility oriented development at that location. So you'll be hearing a lot more of that in the future. One of the things that came up that's Birmingham related is there used to be a South Oakland Model Railroad Club at the Birmingham train station. That's now the Big Rock Restaurant. And they've shown a lot of interest in possibly setting up a model railroad exhibit at this new facility, as well as the Detroit Historical Museum is considering an annex at this location to move the Glancy train exhibit. So we're trying to think multimodal. I know it's easy for you to think that all we think about is widening I-75, but I think there's some indication that we're thinking differently.
Is that Midtown station that you referred to, is part of that plan to also activate a train that goes from Midtown to Metro Airport?
Certainly there's Amtrak service on that line that goes all the way to Pontiac. And then the RTA has looked at providing commuter rail service to the airport in Ann Arbor. And if not commuter rail, then there'd probably be a increased bus service. So there's a lot of dynamics. It's an exciting project because one of the embarrassing things for the department is we built that Amtrak station in 1990 as a temporary facility. And here we are in 2021 that still exists. So I'd like to think what we build will be something that'll last for 50 years or more and be proud to have.
All right, I think we have one more topic, but again, I will stress that I think we very much appreciate all the material and conversation around, you know, improvements. I think we're all very improvement and or future thinkers here, obviously very cautious in making sure we do the right thing for the residents and for our taxpayers. So again, I really appreciate that. Is there any last minute comments or questions that we have before we move on, I think, to the last topic?
I just wanted to thank all of our speakers again for joining us. We appreciate that. And then I think, Julie, did you have an update? You wanted to talk about some things you're working on regarding Woodward Maple area?
Sure. Actually, Jana, could you allow me to share my screen and I'll bring up Google Earth real quick?
Yep.
And before MDOT goes, I wanted to bring up, we had talked about a couple of pedestrian crossings and just kind of mention, you know, what we discussed the other day, just so the board's aware that that's something that we're looking into. Okay. So the first thing was that we're working on with MDOT and city is to look at the new striping that came in as part of the Park Peabody construction. So the road was open to traffic in November, and there's been some confusion of this 2 lanes going into 3 lanes. The operations of it actually never changed from the previous. I was trying to get the better view here. The actual operations of this intersection did not change from what you see now. But when we investigated it further, we determined that the striping did change. So you can see in this overlay, the lanes were previously varying of width from like 9 to 12 feet. So with the change in the new plan, they're all 10-foot lanes now. And the striping went from a solid to a dashed. So all of the striping that's implemented here is correct. But we understand that there were still some confusion associated with the operations going through the intersection. So we're working through some additional signage and striping to help movement of traffic through this shift across southbound Woodward. So that's something that we're working on, and we'll have more information to bring to the board next month at our meeting.
Thank you.
So, and then I wanted to mention, so this is the next item I know we talked about, we've talked about here at the board, was this crossing here. This is at, let me bring out my roads here. Forest.
Brown and Forest.
So, yes, thank you, Jana. This crossing here is signalized. The crossing on northbound is not signalized. So we recognize that there is, you know, a safety concern here associated with this crossing. So we talked with MDOT, I think it was last week, Lori, about what safety measures could be implemented at this crossing location to make it safer for pedestrians. So it's kind of just a little preview of, you know, things that we're working on with MDOT in regards to Woodward. Jana, am I missing anything?
I think those were the two main ones that you wanted to bring up.
Okay. So yeah, so those are two items that we're working on and we'll be bringing to the board shortly.
So those are the Woodward related ones. I have a separate one. It's not Woodward related. I can save it. But do we have any other, for the team that's on now, I assume we can let them go enjoy their evenings? Okay, sounds like we have no further questions and comments around the Woodward area.
Well, thank you for having us. And like I said, we're here to help. I don't want to, I mean, I kind of sound like I'm all car, but I'm not. It's just, I want to be honest, and we're happy to work with you on any pedestrian improvements as long as they make sense. So in the overall scheme of things, and if we can get Royal Oak on board and we can have a corridor approach, that's great. So anyway, but yep, we're here to help.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Have a good night.
You
You
too.
too. Thanks again.
So the last item is 2021 construction projects.
Yes, in the engineering department, I believe Scott Zelinski, you're going to handle this. Now, I think, I can't remember when you last time saw the members of the engineering department, if you have even met Jim Surhai or not, but we have two new engineers here. So we have Jim Surhai, who works for Hubble, Roth and Clark and is under a contract right now with the city and basically acting as the former Paul O'Meara, the / Austin Fletcher / now Jim Surhai. And Scott Zelinski has been with the city, what, about a year or so? And so he was doing a lot of the inspection work out along Maple on construction projects. And he's now moved into the office more, doing the assistant city engineer role. So I do want to introduce both of these folks. You'll be seeing them quite a bit more. So if you guys want to say something to introduce yourselves, feel free, and then jump into the 2021 construction projects. Jim, you're muted.
Do we need to help unmute anyone, Jana, or? I hate to unmute people. It's
Well, Jim said he was unmuted, but I know Jim said he was unmuted, but we couldn't hear him. You want to try
your
now?
microphone? You have your microphone?
There you go. We can hear you now, Jim.
Okay. Yeah, no, something came up to unmute, but
Just
yeah.
speak up because you're really quiet.
All right. Well, let me change to this other mic. Give me 1 second. I'm sorry.
No, go back to the other one that you had. It was better as you started to talk more. The challenges with virtual meetings, it happens everywhere and mostly all day to those of us who are in Zoom or WebEx calls.
Okay.
Jim, do you have both portions of your mic plugged in?
Yeah, I'm plugged into that jack. So.
All right, we can hear you better now. That's got it.
Well, I'm going through the camera again, but anyway,
Okay.
We'll get on with it. It's getting late, but yeah, hello to everyone. It's nice to see you all, and yeah, we'll be working together here for the next while. I've been, you know, Jana says I am with HRC, but I've been working in the city of Birmingham here on projects for, you know, over 20 years, and have been worked closely with all the previous engineers back to Dennis Dembeck to those days. So very familiar with the conditions around town and the challenges we all face. So I think be able to help out and present our projects to you in a way that's taking into consideration all the multimodal opportunities that we can. So I have Scott here tonight. He's going to go over a list of projects that we're gearing up to get out for construction this year. You know, so we'll be presenting another list of you know, some projects to go over at either the next meeting or the one after.
to follow up. So this is not the complete list, but it's just the ones we want to get going on sooner in the year. And then we'll have some talks coming up for, just as a quick preview for, Oakland Avenue between Woodward and Old Woodward, and then also for the phase 3 of the Woodward reconstruction. So the part between Brown and the South Terminus, or the merging to Big Woodward.
Hey, Jim,
yeah.
may I interrupt you for 1 second? Is there a page number that you're looking at, or if you wanted to share your screen? I don't know if that's helpful. Are you just reading from a list?
I think we just have the list. I mean, Scott's going to present these, so he can go on with that. I'm just going off the top of my head. You'll notice I do that a lot. So, but anyway, thanks a lot, Scott. Do you want to continue on? I'll mute myself.
Yeah. Hi. Nice to meet everyone. As Jana alluded to, I was the city construction engineer, which dealt more with inspection work out on Maple Road. So I'm taking on more responsibilities here now as the assistant city engineer. So you'll definitely be seeing a lot more of me. What Jim was alluding to in his list is some of the stuff we're going to bring probably in the future for more stuff that we know we're going to need input from multimodal from. But for the stuff that we have coming up that we're trying to get out the door right now, we're starting off just kind of following along on the memo I've put out to you guys of Peabody from Maple to Brown. Basically, we're picking up kind of where Maple Road's intersection work ended at Peabody, heading south towards Brown. The intent of the work there is really just to reconstruct the actual asphalt road, as the current curb and sidewalk conditions are in pretty good shape throughout the whole section there. Obviously, if there's minor repairs that need to be done, we're going to do them at those times, but that's the bulk of that work. Obviously, because we're working on it, we're going to be looking at the ADA compliance at the intersections and making sure that we're meeting all required parts of that. And that's kind of the minor for that. You're going to see that trend kind of for all these projects that we put up, is that we're trying to get out the door right now, is either in the past it's been addressed, or it's something that, what we're doing isn't really working on sidewalks because it's mainly like a resurfacing or something like that, where it's minor work to the road. Grant Street, it's actually a 2-section piece. There's 2 blocks that connect right with Lincoln that we are going to be redoing, and it's currently asphalt, but we're actually switching it over to concrete there to match kind of what's going on with the rest of the road. And the multimodal items that would have been needed to be addressed were previously addressed as part of Lincoln right at that intersection. Other than that, the only things we were really seeing was that we have to make sure our ADA compliance is good at the intersections heading to the south. Thanks for the math, Anna.
You're welcome.
Yeah, and that's the I think turquoise is the closest I can think of color there. Thanks, Jana. That's the northern 2-block section of the Grant Street work. And then the rest of the work is all the way at the bottom there for Grant, just before, it's the last block right before 14 Mile. And there's some minor ADA updates that need to be made there. In addition to we're replacing just the concrete road. Most of the sidewalks actually look pretty good. We actually addressed some sidewalk issues in that area, or plan to, I should say, as part of still the ongoing sidewalk program that we're currently in year on. The next one is that bright pink that goes across there. That's Bird Street. This is continued work that was planned long before. It's go through, and there's certain sections where the concrete slabs do need to be replaced because they're starting to fall apart, but it's limited in the areas that need that kind of work. But overall, it's intended to get a asphalt overlay across the whole thing to increase the length of life in that section of the road and make the rideability a little bit better. And just like everywhere else, ADA compliance is being looked at as part of this because we're touching up the area. We want to make sure everything's good because part of the requirements. And then the last section is that purple section up there, which is Townsend, and that's actually our most significant like underground work area we're going to do, where we're going to be updating some sewer connections, fixing anything that's a little bit off there. We did just have, I believe, at that intersection specifically as part of the ADA compliance work we've been doing moving forward as a city, we actually worked on the intersection with Chester already this past year. So I believe we're only actually needing to address ADA issues with Southfield, but we're obviously double checking everything when we go through on the design of that. And then that whole section of road is going to be redone in concrete as well. So I know that was really quick, but it's also getting late at night, so I didn't want to dive too much into what we already have written. But
so I had talked to our two new engineering folks, or newish, and said that we usually review all of these projects before the multimodal board. We look at the multimodal plan and see if there were any significant changes. You know, think of Oakland and Lawndale area where there was a multi-use path and so on. And these ones that they're trying to move forward with now were primarily not in any of the areas that had significant changes, other than, of course, always enhancing the ADA ramps and crossings and that kind of thing. So I guess they're just looking for some feedback so that they can get going with some plans and take them to the commission and get these projects under wraps.
So I'll open it up to the board. Are there any specific questions on the 4 areas highlighted? Andrew, you want to jump in?
Yeah, one's on topic, another one's slightly off. The on topic, I'm looking more at the Townsend Street one right now. Townsend and Martin are the only 2 real straight shots to go from Southfield into downtown that aren't on Brown, which has its own set of issues that's been in front of us before. Is there any consideration to Townsend for adding something like a bike path or something like that to enable connections? Because I don't remember if there's one on Martin, because I rode up around there a lot with my kids when Maple was under construction, but I don't remember it really being specifically bike dedicated in any way, shape or form. It was just low traffic volume. So is there an opportunity to want to look at for Townsend to take it right now? Because Martin's not going to get touched anytime soon. Just a thought to look at that. And then the second question, which is slightly off topic. What's the age of these roads that are being replaced that are in bad shape? And the reason I ask that is when I look at the recommendations from the unimproved streets study, there's an expectation of road life in there for the replacement roads. So I'm wondering what because this is empirical data. These are improved roads. So if they didn't last the 20, 30, 40-year lifespan that's being proposed in unimproved streets, I'd like to know why and what the age of them is, because realistically, that's what we're going to look at with the unimproved streets replacement program is going to be represented by these streets right here, in which case it might change the picture of the analysis.
Yeah, so to answer the question about the bike lane, that's something we have not looked at, but we will. That's why we're here tonight, to get your input, and then so we'll take a look at that and report specifically back on that. And then also,
may not be ideal, Jim, just because of where it ends up on Southfield compared to Martin with the connection to the bike path that exists along Maple. It was just a thought that if it's being touched, does it make sense? If not, okay.
Yeah.
But Johanna said it earlier when we were talking with the Woodward stuff. It's projecting ahead because we're looking at changing the whole mobility around the city. Is there something we could think into a plan? Because if it's being touched, it's minimal cost extra to do something during the planning stage and execution than it is to rework it afterwards. That's all I'm really looking at, is thinking of connecting dots.
Yep, understood. And then as far as the age of the road goes, yeah, I don't have that offhand at my fingertips, but we can definitely look up when this road was paved last and report back on that.
Yeah,
and
all of those Peabody and what have you as well. I'm just curious for my own edification, just because and Dr. Schaefer's got way more knowledge on this from the unimproved streets board, but I was looking at the lifetime expectations of roads that we're putting to replace unimproved streets. And I'm curious for real world data from our city, for our city usage in streets with similar usage pattern, what that would be. So that's why it's off topic, but it's relevant to another board and tying into a city expenditure that's ultimately going to happen.
And yeah, and that, like you said, that's a good question. And, you know, we could look into getting some answers on that. I mean, I think you'll notice from, you know, some of these applications of the method of the road, like say on that Bird Street, we're talking about an overlay. So that's a case where, you know, it's not the full reconstruction. We're in that overlay cycle to extend the life of the concrete road option. You know, when we're talking
I don't
concrete
need
versus asphalt.
methodology, Jim. It was just a question that if it's happening, I would like that data point. We don't need to go into the wheres and why-fors of it. It's not relevant to multimodal, but thank you. Thank you. And if you wouldn't mind getting that, certainly I at the minimum would appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Any other?
I'm sorry, I had a question about Bird Street. Bird Street ends at a dead end, a blockade, doesn't it? Before you get to Woodward?
Yep, that's correct.
And is there, and I can't recall, I'm sorry, are there sidewalks that allow like a stroller to get through that blockade? You know what I'm saying?
Let me look real quick. Yeah, I believe pedestrians can get through. That was put in to stop the cut through traffic. You know, I think at some point in the past, there was a lot of people trying to bypass along.
Right, I just couldn't remember if it was ADA compliant or.
I mean, we'll review that to make sure it meets current ADA requirements, because yeah, something that was done 20 years ago may not stand the test today. So yeah, all that will be reviewed, including that portion there. We'll make sure we verify the pedestrian, you know, we don't just stop where the road ends. It will make sure that pedestrian connection is upgraded if it needs it.
Yeah, I just pulled it up on Google Earth, and it looks like at least through the barricade for traffic, it is looking across to the other side of the alley. That's where I mean, I don't know if we've done any work there more recent than this is a 2012 image. It doesn't look like the far side of the alley is ADA compliant currently. But at least we can make sure that the stuff leading up to there is, and we might be able to address that as part of the project.
Okay, wonderful. Any other questions on comments on that? Okay, I did have a question. So Southfield and Maple, I know we just reconstructed that and gave it a 90-degree orientation. When you're heading from Maple onto Southfield, so you'd actually be going like east or westbound. Mostly my concern is westbound, but I'm sure it comes eastbound as well. When you're heading, sorry, I have dogs that are reminding me that it's late. When you're heading southbound, it seems as though people are driving over the curb, and the curb is maybe slightly cut down. And I'm not sure if that was our intent, but there are tire tracks on the curbs, and I've seen some pretty interesting movements of the wheels of cars. So has that ever come up, Scott, as Commander? I think you're there. Has that come up as an issue, or anybody else seen the same thing?
City Commission while it was being constructed, because I saw the same thing, where people actually went as far over that they dropped into the flower bed. Before it was finished, I could tell there was a problem right there.
It was actually designed that way. And Julie, if maybe you or Ben can jump in here, because I'm not a transportation engineer, obviously, but it was designed on purpose to narrow the road. Am I saying, correct me, jump in if I get this wrong, Julie, but that turn, the big trucks still need that extra width to make the turn, but that only happens occasionally. So the road actually is designed to appear narrower. That's what that extra area is with the lower curb. so that it's safer for pedestrians, and the pedestrians are kept well back of that zone where the crosswalk is and the sidewalks are, et cetera. But it's to kind of be a balancing act between, you know, the big trucks needs there and the pedestrians. Did I say that correctly, Julie?
Yes. Can you still hear me?
Uh-huh.
Okay, good. My video cut out. Yes, that is actually a truck apron that the vehicles are driving over. So it's not a sidewalk. It was designed that way to accommodate truck turning movement. So the intent is that the vehicles should be slowing down to make that turn. If they're driving up on that section, it is intended to be driven upon, but it's really intended to be driven upon by trucks as they're making that turn, so that their vehicle, the wheels track over the truck apron, which is what that is. It's not a low curb, it's a truck apron. You see
So
them more in roundabouts. So if you ever go through a roundabout and the center section of that roundabout it's paved, that's actually a truck apron.
Yeah, that description makes sense to me. I just, in my head, it seems as though there's propensity or opportunity for people to be standing there. But what you're telling us is there's not opportunity for people to be standing there.
No, the sidewalk is set very, very far back from the intersection, and it's not anywhere close to the truck apron. We went out there and looked at it during construction, so it's very clear that it is a truck apron and that the separation from the sidewalk is very distinct.
And I'm evaluating it from a car, so maybe that's my, you know, obviously truck. My point of view is obviously different than if I was walking it, but we haven't gotten like complaints about that area, because generally we do. If someone has a interaction that they share with us, we haven't gotten any from that intersection.
Well, we did receive one commentary, and that was Mr. Haig mentioned earlier. It was actually from him, and we addressed that. And that was, I think, during construction when it was really unclear what was going on. So
I stood
that's
by it,
that's the
but
only.
watched it happen for a while and videoed it, and it was 90% of the vehicles actually went up and got as close to the flower bed as you can imagine without dropping a wheel in. It's quite eye-opening. So I think if Julie can confirm, because I haven't been up there recently. Yes, you're right. The actual sidewalk does cut way on the other side of the flower bed, but I don't remember if there was some sort of physical blocker to stop people taking the long route around the edge to then cut across the road. That I don't remember.
The like post for marking to cross the intersections kind of in the way of going that way. I know that distinct difference is there. And during construction, when you brought up that, we were having issues keeping that post for the exact reason that you guys have described as a problem, where people were driving into our flower bed before it was even made. We literally had a truck take our post out. And I think at that time, it really made it look like it was a sidewalk as opposed to a truck apron. So I completely understood where you're coming from during construction with that question.
So I'll go back
it is
to
a mountable curb. So there is a delineation between the pavement and the curb, but it is a mountable curb on the truck apron so that the truck can get over onto the apron, but it's supposed to deter vehicles to keep them onto the roadway.
Yeah, I'm not sure that the latter part of that is happening, but I appreciate our intent and the design and the improvements that have been made. It sounds like we've not, since Andrew's insights shared and remedies accordingly, we haven't had any further complaints.
The only thing that I would like to ask to look at again, and I asked for it at the time, because when there was no way we were going to tear it out, and I understood what it was there for, but I asked at the time, maybe if we cut rumble strips into it, because then rumble strips are a visual for anyone on there that that's not a pedestrian walkway anymore. Because right now it's just smooth. It's angled, but it's smooth, and it could be misconstrued. But something like a rumble strip, it's going to tell cars they're in the wrong place. Trucks have no option. They can arrive over it, but a pedestrian will start looking at grooves, and they'll get the very unsubtle hint very quickly. That's not a walkway.
Yeah, I guess maybe without trying to design it by a committee, and or some anecdotal issue. I just wanted, again, I'm opening up the question. Is there an issue there or is it not? I've seen people drive over it. I attempted one morning, realized it wasn't a curb. So I'm just trying to make sure that if it's intended to be driven over, but not fully intentionally by a car, that's one thing.
How
mean-
often
Go ahead.
are sorry, I didn't raise my hand, but here I am. How often are truck aprons like in so near to pedestrian walkways? Like I understand that the sidewalk is set back from it, but just that like, you know, I think the average driver in Birmingham is not accustomed to a truck apron. You know, if you queried the average person about that, they probably wouldn't know what that meant. So I guess, you know, given that it like looks similar to a sidewalk and that it's smooth concrete and it's near to where people are, how common is this scenario where you have a truck apron in a like very close to a downtown urban, you know, city type situation, I guess? So in which case it might make sense to make it look different, at least in its appearance. So, hello.
Well, I guess I would answer just to say, you know, near Birmingham, you could see similar aprons like this along Crooks Road and along Rochester Road. And those are areas where they put, you know, boulevard, you know, kind of a divided road, but the boulevard isn't wide enough to accommodate the truck from turning. So you'll see extra concrete, you know, along the nose of that that turnaround, but then also on the opposite lane, you know, so it could be like right, it almost looks like a bus stop because it's like right next to where the sidewalk goes, but that's for the truck to make that wide swing out around there and still not have to drive over the grass. So, you know, I think they're around, and you know, I think obviously, you know, especially I think with traffic engineering, you know, it's not always an exact science. You know, we have to be part psychologist and have a crystal ball sometimes too to predict how people are gonna react to it. But I think the big thing is always being open to hear the comments and feedback and be ready to make you know some adjustments that are warranted if it seems like you know a lot of drivers aren't picking up on or pedestrians aren't picking up on what the intent was. So
I just want to point out that you ask if they're in other areas, Woodward and Maple. Old Woodward and Maple, all four corners.
Okay. I just don't know that the average person knows what that is. You know, when they're traversing that area, I recognize from a traffic engineering standpoint, it makes perfect sense. I'm coming at this from a ignorant pedestrian who's just walking around or noticing things that I don't know that the average person knows. They're there, you see them, but I don't know that anyone knows what they are, right? So if you're going to encounter it potentially as a pedestrian, it's just a thought. Like Andrew said, you know, doing something with like a rumble, you know, just brings your attention to it that it's not a place to stand. It's a potentially dangerous place to stand. So
yeah, maybe some paint. I think that was one of the other. I'm trying to remember the whole conversation at the time, but rumble strips is a permanent change. I personally like them because the drivers know about them, but Julie, there's the crossing there. Do we not have to have pedestrians physically cross this apron at some point, or is it the crossing that's just further south where you have to walk south to get across? Because the old crossing was
yeah, so the crossing is there and it's clearly delineated. It's just north of where the truck apron is. So it is very clear that there's a pedestrian crossing and that you're not to walk on the truck apron. Because I went out there while it was under construction, took pictures, made sure it was all being constructed properly and as designed. So no, it is very well marked and delineated with the proper ADA for pedestrians.
But isn't there the crossing just south of there when you come up the steps from Martha Baldwin? You can cross straight over to, that's what I was getting at earlier when I was talking about the direct shot into downtown with Townsend and Martin. You can cross over, get onto Martin, and then you're straight into downtown. So someone could go up, not want to wait for the light, then walk down the apron to the next crossing that's 100 yards south of there. That's what I'm thinking about.
It doesn't connect. So you could, because I did that. I crossed there at the mid block and then walk down the sidewalk, which kind of goes at an angle. As so the distance between the back of the curb and the sidewalk, it increases as you get closer, as you head north. So that and that's where the truck apron is really just around that flower bed. So by the time you get to that crossing, it's gone. So there's going to be no mistaking where somebody's going to accidentally walk on the truck apron. It's really buffered by the flower bed.
Let's do this, since we all have our past experiences and you know, certainly old ones and new ones. Let's just, you know, there's 5 or 6 of us. Evaluate Maple and Southfield sometime in the next month or 2, and we'll, if we feel that there's warranted some other action or dialogue or discussion, then we can have it. Because I think, I don't know, maybe some of us have been out there more recently, some of us not, and we just need to fill in the gaps and have a fresh experience.
From both perspectives, I would say, do it walking and do it driving.
Great point, Tom.
Yeah. For me, I've never turned there and not gone on the apron in my car. So I'm kind of with Andrew on this, some sort of rumble strip. I don't know what it is about it, but it seems whether it's the optics or whether it's the way it's paved or whatever, it seems to want to put the car on the apron.
So my experience from just when we opened it up in construction is that people want to turn that corner so fast that they overturn the corner, and that's why they drive on it. But again, being that it's a truck apron, it is designed to have traffic on it. It's just not really intended to have, you know, small vehicle traffic on it. So it can handle it. It's just, you know, the joke that the contractors like to make was, well, if people knew how to stay in their lane, they'd be fine. They wouldn't be going up on it. But you know, it is a perception thing. I think it's a little bit of people try to take the corner fast and go quick. Because I think that corner was a lot sharper before we did it. And because of that, I think people instinctively from before like to cut it really quick. And I think that's half of what leads.
Yeah, there's some legacy there, because I think it was kind of banked a little bit too. You could really whip around that old corner, and there may be a lot of people like me that are just used to doing that.
Yeah, I think the danger is more on the pedestrian side. I think if we had appropriate marking, whether it's paint or what, on the ground to basically say, pedestrians, stay back here, because you're going to have wide turns one way or another, whether it's a vehicle or a truck.
Yeah.
So let's just make sure our walkers are protected. So
yep.
I think we ought to
Good
just
idea.
look at, where would that, that likely spot, that sweet spot be, and what do we put down to make that demarked?
Okay, so let's go back to let's have a fresh experience. I know it's going to get frigidly cold, so we'll see over the next couple months if you can get yourself out there and both in a car and walking, and we'll come back at a different point and just kind of condense our insights together. Okay?
Cool.
Okay, I think that was the last thing on the official agenda. I don't think we've had anybody from the public on. I flipped a couple times, but no. Okay, thanks, Jana. Were there any other topics not on the agenda that we wanted to bring up? Okay, if not, then we'll close the meeting at 7:59. Thanks, everybody.
David's got something.
Oh,
I had something, I'm sorry, and I'll be very quick because I know your dogs are barking. Snow removal. Sidewalks, a lot of people are still not clearing sidewalks. I see complaints all the time. What does our board have to do with that, if anything?
Our board has nothing to do with that. But if you do see something where there's an area of concern and you shoot one of us an email, we'll send it along to the Department of Public Services, and they actually go out and issue tickets for that. Well, I don't know if they issue tickets or code enforcement issues tickets, but they're the ones that go out, because we did recently just have a complaint about the bike lanes on Eaton, people dumping their snow in there. So we sent that along, and they're going to go out and take care of it. And I drove up and down there yesterday or the day before, and it was cleared out. Now, whether that was melting or snow removal, I don't know, but send it along and I'll pass it over to the Department of Public Services.
okay. Any other last minute questions? comments? All right, we will close the meeting at 8 o'clock then. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.